Formations in Rise of Kingdoms are very interesting. There are constantly new formations coming into the game, and there's always a lot of talk around the formation system itself. Which formations are the best? Which formations to focus on? Should you switch up your whole entire formations? And today, I'm going to talk about how important are formations really. Are they really that important, or are they something that should be a secondary focus for most accounts? So if you want to know kind of the truth behind formations, how much you really should focus on them, how much they really do matter, and my personal opinions about them, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by going over the actual formation themselves, not the armaments, not the inscriptions, just the literal formation, and how much does it really matter. Now, in reality, the actual formation itself doesn't really matter because everybody is going to be running a formation. There's no reason to run no formation on the open field at all, and it's really simple to just pick the best formation for whichever troop you're running. For example, if you want to run combo attack, you're going to run the Delta formation. If you want to run, let's say you're running some army that needs march speed, maybe it's something to join a rally with, you might as well use the triple line formation. If you're using a lot of skill damage, you're going to use the wedge formation. If you're using a lot of smite damage, you might use the arch formation, or you might use the new formation that's coming to the game. I think it is called the pincer formation. Really simple to just pick the correct formation itself, and that kind of does matter, picking the right one for whichever thing you're using. And I just listed the general gist of which ones you would pick, because that's a really simple, easy thing that you can do, and if someone picks the wrong ones, you're going to have a small advantage over them. Now, in reality, 5% more normal damage or 5% more skill damage isn't going to make the biggest difference. Now, it's probably going to help your trade a small bit, but generally, if you didn't have a formation on compared to if you did, your trade's going to be next to identical overall, just because 5% of skill damage when you're already at possibly 80 to 90% between your march isn't going to do too much for you. Obviously nice to have, and choosing the right formation does matter, but if you have a slightly wrong chosen formation, so for example, if you've got a really good arch formation right now, it might not be worth picking up the pincer formation, because you may have to do all your armaments again. You have to spend more resources, you'll have to reinscribe everything. So in that situation, there's a chance that just sticking with the arch formation makes the most sense and is just going to be the best for your account. So the formation itself doesn't really make the biggest difference. It's not going to be super impactful for the majority of players. Now again, of course it is going to have some level of impact, but it isn't going to be gang breaking to the point where you should switch up the whole formation based on the literal stats it gives. So for example, when formations first came out, I invested in the arch formation. No reason I should have done that, but the wedge formation is obviously better with Boudica. However, I don't have enough stuff for multiple wedge formations, so I just run arch formation on Boudica, and it's got some really good inscriptions generally compared to my other formations. So it is a good formation for me to run, and there's no point in me switching it to the wedge formation because I've got really good stats and really good inscriptions on my arch formation armaments. Now this brings me on to the armaments themselves. How much do they actually matter? And generally, the armaments are going to be the heaviest impacting thing, besides possibly some inscriptions, which we will talk about very soon. Armaments themselves have the biggest impact. They can have, I think the maximum is 3.5% of any stat besides all damage or march speed in each slot. So for example, an armament can have up to, I think it's 10 to 11% of total stats, and between 4 armaments that is up to 44% stats. Now to get a perfect armament is almost impossible. I think 3.5 is the max. I did roll a 3.5% archer health here. I'm pretty sure that's the max that you can get in terms of stats. I may be wrong, but I'm very close to certain that is the maximum you can get, and that is a very hefty amount of stats overall, which is why I would say when it comes down to the armament itself, the stats are what matters the most. Now, getting 3.5% in every single slot is not reasonable, but just getting some amount of whichever troop stat you want in each slot is going to make a pretty big difference for you. For example, let's say you just had 2% of stats on each armament, which is on average pretty achievable overall. You're looking at around 6% per armament, 24% total stats. Now, to compare that, for example, to a commander's equipment, Obviously, it's not as high, but it is like having a full chunk of extra equipment, up to an extra 27% defense, for example, you could get from Armaments. So the actual Armament stats themselves are what's going to give you the most impact in general, compared to the formation stats, which can be at maximum like a 10% bonus for a really specific thing like combo attack damage. You're looking at way more of an impact from the actual armament stats themselves, especially in regards to getting health and all damage bonuses, which are going to give you the biggest boost on the open field. The all damage that you can get from an armament is easily the strongest part about it. I think the max you can get is 1%, but 4% all damage total across 4 armaments is going to be really, really powerful, and it's going to give you a very nice trade on the open field. Overall, 4% all damage, while it might not sound like a lot, is enough to add up. A lot of commanders only have like 5 to 10% all damage in their kit, especially older commanders. Newer commanders, a little bit more all damage, but even then, 4% does still add up, and maybe the maximum is 2% and I'm wrong, and then you could have 8% all damage, and that is really nice. So the actual armament stats are what matters the most in most situations, just because of how impactful they are and the fact that they are a hefty chunk of stats that your march is going to be gaining, to the point where it is quite noticeable on the open field. The other aspect to armaments is their actual inscriptions. How much do these matter? The answer is variably. Most inscriptions aren't really that important, for the simple reason that they're just stat boosts. So for example, Pursuer, I gain an extra 2% all damage if the troop has under 20% units remaining. Really specific, doesn't really matter, it's just a super small bonus that I have with my armaments. Even Boiling Point, I gain up to 2% skill damage bonus, and whenever I deal direct damage, I have a 30% chance to reduce incoming skill damage by 5% for the next 3 seconds. Almost negligible, I'm probably not even going to notice it. I might take a small 10, 15, maybe max like 200 sev wound discount if I get hit with a massive AoE after this triggers, but generally that's not going to be noticed. Even the legendary inscription in the wedge formation, 5% skill damage boost, and whenever I deal damage to a single target, it's increased by 10%. Otherwise, it's increased by 2%, a maximum of a 10% skill damage bonus there, or 15%. While that is quite a hefty amount and that does matter, A, it's only the single target, B, if it's an AoE, it's only 2%. So generally, when we look at these aspects of inscriptions, most of them, while they are nice to have, actually don't matter as much as the stats. In my opinion, I would rather have the 4% all damage I could get on my inscriptions than the possible 15% in the Hunter inscription, or generally it's going to be about 7%. So all damage and the stats on the actual armaments themselves, especially if you roll perfect stats, are going to be much better than the inscriptions. Not to mention, you can switch inscriptions across armaments. You can often be able to inscribe them yourself by getting more inscriptions from your KVKs, which makes inscriptions less of a focus for the majority of armaments. If you get a really good stat armament, then you're in a good position. If you get a really poor stat armament and a good inscription, while it's still nice, you can transmutate it, you can swap the stats, that is nice, but just having access to better stats is going to be nicer if you have to choose between them. The only time where it isn't really the best option and the inscription can be really, really good, and this is just one of them that comes to mind, is with the Delta formation. There is a really important inscription that allows you to pretty much just increase the amount of effects that you're going to be triggering, and it is on the instrument, the butterfly effect. Your combo attacks are 20% more likely to trigger effects triggered by a basic attack. That is an insane buff. That is probably the strongest armament boost in terms of whenever you look at it for a inscription. It's a ridiculous boost, the butterfly effect, and it is going to give a really massive boost to a lot of marches that are using combo attack. In that situation, the inscription is absolutely essential. Screw all the stats. If you don't have the correct inscription, you're not going to do as good. So generally, inscriptions are nice, but you can see here, sometimes they're not the most impactful, like gaining 8% bonus to combo attack is nice, but it's not overpowered. The Steel Skin, 2% damage resistance, and whenever you launch a combo attack, take 1.5% less damage for the next 10 seconds. I mean, this can stack up to 5 times. This is actually quite good. See, some inscriptions can be really nice, but generally, we're looking more at the stats. A lot of inscriptions can be quite average, and the only real formation where I can see this being the case, being different at least, is the Delta formation, because for some reason, the legendary inscriptions on this are just absolutely insane. But the majority of inscriptions are just small damage bonuses that, while are nice to have, will not give you the most overpowered change in the open field. You would rather have access to the stats on the armaments. Now, there are some really good inscriptions out there, and obviously, in the best world, you can gain access to every single inscription with the best stats. But if you have to pick between focusing on inscriptions or focusing on good stats, you probably want to focus on getting those good stats, because inscriptions, legendary ones, are really, really rare, and while they are really, really nice, they aren't going to be the most game changing compared to a lot of other things, such as focusing on the armament stats themselves. Now, with that being said, how much do armaments matter in comparison to equipment and in comparison to commanders themselves? Now, in my opinion, of the three, commanders, equipment, and armaments are the least important for the majority of players. Commanders should be your number one focus. They're going to give you the most stats. They're the main damage dealers. They are pretty much everything to do with the march, because even an absolutely meta commander is going to destroy a mediocre commander with good armaments. So, for example, a commander like a Zulang with a Herman Prime is definitely going to outtrade a march like a Boudica with a YSG, even if Boudica YSG has the best armaments, full legendary inscribed, because Zulang Herman Prime just has way more AoE and it's going to get much better trades on the open field. So getting the most meta commanders is a bigger priority over armaments, in my opinion. Getting the best equipment is also generally a bigger priority, because A, equipment is guaranteed value. You know where you're spending your gems, you know where they're going to go, you know what value you're going to get. And B, it is going to be generally higher for most things. In total with equipment, you can get up to 60%, if not more stats, and that is an insane amount compared to armaments, which can give you up to 44% if you get perfect rolls, and if you have perfect inscriptions can be slightly better. But in most situations, getting perfect inscriptions is almost impossible. So when it comes down to it, at least having full legendary sets of equipment is more important initially than focusing on your armaments. After that, then you can start spending gems and focusing on armaments, because if you spend gems on armaments that you don't really want to focus on, your commanders could lack, especially if you don't have a good VIP level, and your equipment could lack as well, and in most situations they are going to be better. On top of this, focusing on equipment is much easier to do, focusing on commanders is much easier to do, they are guaranteed value, whereas armaments, even though there are a lot of ways to re-roll them and transmutate them and put new inscriptions on them and switch inscriptions, generally, we're looking at a situation where even if we are able to inscribe armaments or convert armaments, they aren't going to be the biggest thing that you should be focusing on, because otherwise you could get stuck with poor commanders and poor equipment, which will give you worse trades than even if you had meta armaments. Again, the only time where you'd see armaments being really good is with a combo march, because of how overpowered the Delta formation is, and while the stats on armaments are important, I think that focusing on commanders and focusing on equipment is going to give you a better long-term investment strategy and a better long-term gain on the open field than focusing on armaments specifically. Now, that being said, doing stuff like your daily dispatches all the time because they're basically completely free, doing stuff like your daily travels all the time because they're free, buying Oratarch testimonies when you get access to them, these things can help you get good armaments. I don't think I've spent a single gem on my armaments at all, and I've got not the most amazing armaments, but I've got a bearable set of armaments. I've got a legendary inscription on one, I've got pretty good stats on my Boudica's armaments, so generally when it comes down to it, you can get a nice set of armaments without having to spend a lot of gems on them, which is important. Saving those gems and those resources for things where you can guarantee value, and letting the game just give you RNG rolls for your armaments can generally be fine. Obviously, don't just fully ignore armaments, get that safe form up, even if that means spending a few gems on it, but spending gems on armament events or buying armament bundles in the super value bundle section are not going to be the best way to either spend your money or spend your gems. So generally, when it comes down to it, in my opinion, armaments are important, yes, but they are not a game-changing aspect of something that you should be focusing on. I'd focus commanders, equipment, and then finally, I would spend gems on armaments after that. And then the last thing would be refining your equipment to get it special talented, or awakening it and iconicking it more. So generally, we're going to be looking at commanders, equipment, armaments, and then equipment upgrades in that order, and that's going to give you the most value, because armaments, you can work on them passively, you don't need to spend gems on them. There's no such thing as an armament blueprint, and most inscriptions are locked behind either just getting lucky or winning KVKs, and obviously those two things will just happen over time. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, I want to ask you guys to please consider subscribing to the channel. I know I ask it all the time, but it is just a really nice small way to help me out when I make these videos. It's a very small thing to do. It's really, really easy to undo it. If you end up hating my content, you can always just unsubscribe, but it's a small action that does make a really big impact. Other than that, I just want to say I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.